Just check that we're. Okay, it appears we are. Okay, so welcome to everyone on the call. Welcome to people watching on YouTube. This is the Socratic seminar. We've got a Zoom call up and it's being live streamed on YouTube. Anybody watching on YouTube, feel free to comment questions. And there is a reading list that I'll share the link to. And that can give us some structure for the discussion. We don't have to stick to it, but we'll see where it goes, where it takes us. For people on the Zoom call, if you click on reactions, there's there's not too many people. I don't think we'll need it. Unless a lot more people come, just reactions and raise hand. Otherwise, just interrupt. But yes, so let's do intros first. We'll start with the Suredbits guys, and then we'll go to Patrick and Roman. So, Chris, do you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Chris Stewart. I'm the founder of Suredbits, and yeah, we do discrete log contracts.
Cool. Thanks, Chris. We'll go to Ben next.
I'm Ben, or Ben the Carman. Been at Suredbits for about almost 2 years, just doing Bitcoin development stuff, primarily on DLCs.
Cool. Patrick.
We could say non-technical, just an enthusiast, and here to soak up some knowledge.
Cool. I did say earlier you'll be answering the basic DLC questions. So you're like our allocated DLC noob. Roman, do you want to do an intro?
Oh, hi guys. Yeah, I'm also work for Suredbits and work on all the DLC stuff.
So we've got 3 Suredbits guys. Cool. So let's start with the basic concepts. As we were saying before, there are tons of resources out there, and I don't want to just like redo some of the like conversations and interviews that have already been had. But I feel as if we just have to go over the basic concepts first, right, before we go into the advanced stuff. We don't want to leave Patrick behind too early. So let's just start with like what is a DLC, and we'll go to you, Patrick, and then we'll go to some of our experts on the call. So what is the DLC from your 20 minutes of video watching before?
Well, it's a way to have like an Oracle system, or I guess on is it via the Lightning Network? I'm not even sure. But I'm not going to make a fool of myself. I'm just going to let you guys handle that.
No, that's fine. You're getting close. That was a good 20 minutes worth of your time.
I think we should publicly shame him for not being an expert in 20 minutes of watching videos on YouTube. How do you not know everything, Patrick? I mean, come on, man.
But yeah, just before we get the answer from the experts, like, is there anything from your watching of the videos before that makes you interested in DLCs? Is this an interesting concept to you?
Yeah,
you attended the course, so I'm assuming it's vaguely interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just I've been looking into like the different kind of things you can do. With the other day, I bumped into secure multi-party computation, and that just blew my mind. And I don't know what those kind of things really mean, but I'm trying to understand it a bit more, you know. And so this seems like another one of those applications where, yeah, sounds very interesting.
Okay, so let's go to one of our experts, whoever wants to take this. So what is the concept of a DLC? How is it different to, say, a smart contract on Ethereum? Is it a bet? You know, like what types of contracts are we talking about here?
Yeah, so just very simply put, DLCs are a way to make Bitcoin transactions contingent on things that are happening in the real world. Bitcoin scripting system, or any blockchain system for that matter, only can check and know about data that's within its actual like code, I guess. it can't reach out into the real world and determine, who won the presidential election. Even simple things like what's the Bitcoin price, or what's the hash rate that Bitcoin actually has currently, or, what's the last block hash, even or odd? Like those are things that are very, almost native to the Bitcoin scripting system. But, with Bitcoin's limitations, it can't build Bitcoin transactions based on that information. DLCs are a way to allow transactions that are contingent on real world events, or even Bitcoin network specific information in a trust transparent way, is what I call it. It's definitely contingent on an oracle attesting to something that happened, and you do need to trust that oracle. But you can clearly tell when that oracle has misbehaved or lied, or there's cryptographic evidence, at least, that you can use to show that this oracle was misbehaving.
Cool. And everyone should know this, but discrete log contract, and it's kind of a play on words, right? Taj Striger, like it's a play on discrete log and being discrete or being private with what you're actually doing.
Noting that even further is like, most people seem to spell discrete DISCRETE, but again, going on the play on words, it's actually DISCREET, which is the pun that Taj has in his white paper, which was phenomenal. Of course, Taj is great.
Yeah, but you curse him for the naming, maybe. Okay. So just before we go on to the reading list, so why are we only now talking about like discrete log contracts on Bitcoin when like supposedly Ethereum has taken the smart contract use case? Why is it taking us so long to start doing these kinds of smart contracts on Ethereum, on Bitcoin? And what is the difference between like a DLC on Bitcoin and like a smart contract on Ethereum?
I would say like the reason it's taken so long is like, for one, the actual paper that Taj Striger wrote didn't come out till 2017. And I think, there wasn't really too much development like on like actually making these things a reality until 2019, 2020. And now with like us and Crypto Garage and a couple other open source guys, we've actually like have like working clients and stuff. So it's actually like taken a while to like build out all this infrastructure to like make it happen, but it's kind of becoming a reality now. So we're no longer like, LARPing. But yeah, and like what is the difference between Ethereum is like an Ethereum contract, like if you like, code it up in Solidity and post it to their blockchain, and now if I want to use that, now I will always use like the same contract that everyone else is using. And it's very explicit I'm using this contract, versus with the DLC, I'm just entering into like a 2 of 2 multi-sig, and all of my contract logic is done off chain, where if an oracle signs, and then it's able to produce one transaction that spends that 2 of 2 multi-sig. So it's a lot different like models versus like just publishing and letting the blockchain do your actual contract execution and verification, versus a DLC is a lot more client side execution and verification, which makes it a lot more scalable and a lot more private, which as Bitcoiners we definitely want that.
Right. So I mean, the trade-off Ethereum took was to have a more rich, the term they used was rich statefulness, right? Like we're pushing everything off chain and trying to touch the chain as little as possible, whilst they're able to have like an oracle built even like within the VM, within the Ethereum virtual machine, which does have some benefits, right? Like you're not having to, like the contract can automatically update rather than going to an oracle, getting a signature and sending an updated transaction to the chain. But the trade-off that you get with that is obviously that it's completely unscalable because everything's done within the virtual machine and you're not pushing anything off chain whatsoever. Would you agree with that?
So I would like what Ben's saying is right about, DLCs are vastly superior in scalability and privacy. The thing that we give up though with the UTXO model versus the account model is the market actually existing on chain, which is what has led to the rise of things like Uniswap with their automated market makers. That's, functionality that's very hard to replicate in the UTXO model. And we're still, figuring out like, how can you facilitate a liquid market that trades 24/7 without having, jurisdictional requirements impressed upon you because, you're a centralized company in whatever jurisdiction that you're in. One of the, more interesting developments lately has been the whole Uniswap company versus protocol saga, where they ended up delisting, securities via their web interface. But the underlying Uniswap protocol, as far as I know, still has, gray market or black market liquidity pools available to them. So, putting aside the Ethereum stuff, in DLC land, it's very hard for us to have this market structure exist on a third party kind of collective resource like a blockchain, and give people these abilities to trade 24/7. So that's like another one of these like fundamental architecture differences here. They give up on privacy, scalability. They get this like liveliness at 24/7 that people really like. And we're still working on, we've got two of these great principles, I guess, or kind of core things, but still the market infrastructure piece is an open question here.
These are like this isn't a DLC specific problem though, like, things like join market, BISC, like Lightning Pool all have like the same problem. So like, if BISC has a different model, join market has a different model. So like these are solvable things. It's just like really picking one or picking all of them and seeing what works.
It's the problem of the matching engine. So I mean, what Chris was saying is that you can have the matching engine on chain, and that brings certain benefits, even though it's totally unscalable. But like otherwise, if you're doing that off chain, you're having to build that whole matching engine like independently without, I don't know, automatic access to the blockchain or automatic rights to the blockchain whenever you want, right?
Yeah, I mean, matching engines can be built, and that's pretty well understood space. It's the regulatory, the legal, compliance restrictions that come with if I were to host these things on Suredbits servers, well, of course I need to comply with United States regulations for offering DLCs. If Michael, you were to host these things in London, you would need to you're the person that's hosting a centralized server where trades are being matched, so you have legal requirements there too. Now, if it's hosted on a blockchain, well, it's a collective resource here. So you're not necessarily liable. I'm not necessarily liable if I'm running a validator. It's, kind of this network that is, hosting the market rather than, a single company's server. So it is very unscalable. It is very not private, but there is certain benefits to that model when it comes to the legal and regulatory world, at least as it stands now. Maybe this changes in the United States and, certain three-letter agencies decide to try and hold validators liable, which, is a contemporary issue, I guess. But it definitely is on stronger footing when it comes to, legal and regulatory stuff compared to, the UTXO model in that regard.
I didn't want to get into regulation, but like if you're uploading, say, data onto the Ethereum blockchain, why is that any different to like an Oracle off-chain uploading data to a website? And then I get the matching. I never thought the matching engine would be subject to similar regulation as like a custodian. That didn't even occur to me, because you're not taking any funds. It's like a dating service, right? You're just matching two parties that want the opposite things. But yeah, I suspect you've looked at the regulation more than I have.
Yeah, and maybe this is United States based compared to the rest of the world. Maybe it's different, but it's still an active area of debate. And yeah, I guess I'm turning this into a regulatory talk now rather than a technical one. So I'll stop talking about that.
Okay. Yeah, London Bitcoin regulators can discuss that conversation. London Bitcoin devs will stick to the technical part. Okay, let's get to this reading list then. Let me share my screen. Second. Okay, so that should be showing my screen. So I've got this reading list up. Everyone can see that, right? So we've kind of covered the basic concept of discrete log contracts. Z-Man has some excellent thoughts on smart contracts on Bitcoin. We kind of covered differences between Bitcoin and Ethereum. Just before we go on to some of the examples of DLCs in the wild, let's do that. So some of the examples that I could find, you can tell me if there's a few others, the Suredbits guys. So one was Nicholas Dorier and Chris entering into a bet on the election, and that was organized via Twitter. So does that make Twitter a matching engine? Should Twitter be under regulation?
Maybe.
So that, and we'll go into how it works behind the scenes, but I just wanted to give, especially Patrick or anybody else who's not particularly interested in, or hasn't looked at DLCs that much so far, like what you can do. So that's just an election bet. Who took the Oracle in that case between you and Nicholas, Chris?
I don't think the Oracle has revealed himself publicly yet, so I won't.
Okay,
I won't
so
dox
private
the Oracle. It's so he does have a Twitter account. It's a Outcome Observer on Twitter, I believe, is his handle, and he distributed his Oracle information via Twitter, so that we could take the information embedded in his tweets and start constructing DLCs based off the cryptographic information he published. So that's, and then he followed up after the fact and also revealed what we call attestations, which just is a fancy word for signatures that corresponded to, you know, the outcome in the election. In this case, I believe it was a bet on the United States presidential election in 2020. The two candidates running were Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Nicholas took 60-40 odds where I put up 0.6 Bitcoin for Joe Biden winning. Nicholas put up 0.4 Bitcoin for Donald Trump winning. And we built a DLC that encoded these conditions inside of a set of Bitcoin transactions. And the way this is done with DLCs is you end up publishing a funding transaction. That's a 2 of 2 multi-sig output. And then you have encrypted versions of the settlement transactions that correspond to every outcome that can possibly occur during the bet. So if I recall correctly, during this bet, the 3 outcomes were, Joe Biden winning. So that's one transaction, Donald Trump winning, another transaction. And then I believe we had a tie case or a draw case or, some sort of, it's always good to have like a backup case for, either the Oracle going haywire or just, well, no, I guess in this case, it wouldn't be Oracle going haywire. It's just there's an unresolved bet. Like, I don't know, like it's unclear who won the election. So it's always good to have a draw or a other case. And that was the third encrypted transaction.
Yeah, we'll get into how DLCs have evolved, like from Taj's initial design to now. I just wanted to go through a few of the examples and just like the parameters of these contracts before we do that, for just to give some examples to people who are new to this. But that was cool, Chris. So then the next one I had up was Chris and Nadav on price volatility. So this is where there's various derivatives that you can just copy straight from the financial sector, right? And just substitute Bitcoin in for whatever fiat currency or asset price that you're interested in. So this one was a bet on the volatility of the Bitcoin price. I think one of you betted that there would be a lot of volatility and the other one bet that there would be less volatility. Is that right?
Yeah, if my memory serves, if you go back up to that graph up there, Michael, at the top, I can add a little bit of commentary to this graph. So for people that are new to DLCs, This graph here represents what we call a payout curve. So on the x-axis of this graph, you have United States dollars. You can see it starts all the way down at $12,000. The kind of triangle that we have here hits the x-axis at $19,000, and it goes all the way out to $28,000 on the far right-hand side of the x-axis. What this is saying here is, we're creating this volatility contract at a strike price of 19,000 United States dollars. So if I remember correctly, in this contract, Nadav was short volatility, which means that he wants the Bitcoin price to stay around $19,000 when we settle. If it's still close to $19,000, that means there wasn't very much volatility during the interval or the period that we were monitoring for. However, me on the other side of the trade was long volatility. I want to get paid more as the Bitcoin price diverges from $19,000. So as the Bitcoin price, hits $20,000, I start getting paid more Satoshis on the y-axis. So on the y-axis here, it specifies the payouts in Satoshis that I receive if the Oracle attests to a certain outcome. So if the price that the Oracle attests to was $19,000, I get 0 Satoshis. Well, that sucks. Like, I don't want $19,000 to be attested to. However, if the Oracle attests to the price of $17,000, well, that's very good for me. I'm getting all the money in the DLC here. I get 200,000 Satoshis if you look at the y-axis. So depending upon what the Oracle attests to, the more volatile the Bitcoin market is, the more profitable this DLC is for me. However, if the Bitcoin price doesn't move at all, well, that's not very good for me, and I end up losing all the amount of money that I contributed into this DLC. And I'm realizing now I didn't specify how much collateral I contributed up front. If I remember correctly, Nadav contributed 100,000 sats of collateral, and I contributed another 100,000 sats of collateral. So we're equally collateralized. If the Bitcoin price doesn't move, Nadav gets all the money. If the Bitcoin price moves a lot, I get all of his money. And that's kind of the financial conditions for this DLC. And did that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds a bit esoteric, but like anybody who's followed derivatives in financial markets knows that, like, in the fiat economies, this is billions and billions of dollars traded every day on this kind of stuff, on price volatility of various assets. But as you say, Chris, the big difference, at least with how DLCs are set up now, is that we do have that limited collateral within the DLC. And so you can only lose the collateral that you post. And in the conventional financial industry, like, you can lose your shirt, like you can lose everything. You do a leveraged trade betting that a price is going to go up or down, or that it's going to be particularly volatile or less volatile. And if you get it completely wrong, well, you can lose a lot more than your initial collateral. So that's the big difference. But this is a big thing. Yeah, go for it, Ben.
Something important too is you can only gain as much as your other counterparty puts up too, which is like, in the fiat system, you can 100x leverage and get like $1 million versus this, if your party only puts up, 1 Bitcoin, you can only win 1 Bitcoin.
Right. But maybe as this matures, perhaps like if there was a big enough market with everyone betting their collateral, then perhaps you then expand into where you can, where there's custodianship, and you perhaps can win more or less than the initial collateral price. So that was volatility. The next one I had up was, block streaming crypto garage on the Bitcoin price. So again, this is derivatives, and this was a forward contract.
Yeah, this was, I think published in 2019 or maybe even 2018 from, 2019 from Blockstream. And, this is, as far as I know, the first DLC executed on the Bitcoin main chain. We've come quite a ways from what is detailed in this blog post from a technical perspective I think, but the actual financial engineering side of things here is pretty straightforward. If I recall correctly, it's just a linear payout based on what the Oracle attests to. But I have to admit, I did not look through this old blog post before I jumped on. So sorry about that.
No.
Yeah, it's the colored forward contract that they executed pretty manually using like handwritten scripts as opposed to like libraries that auto-generated things. And this was also before the use of adapter signatures. So they used quite a bit more script and more complicated stuff.
This is an interesting added dimension though, because they used the Japanese yen stablecoin on Liquid as part of the derivative. So that's kind of adding another.
Well, I think that's in the more to come section. So I don't know if
that's
that
not
actually
exactly what
occurred
they
here.
did. Okay. Okay, maybe you're right then, Chris. So it was purely a Bitcoin.
Yeah, it was a proof of concept.
Okay.
And yeah, I mean, Michael, I don't know, maybe we're saving technical stuff for later, but this would be a fun topic to touch on when we get to the technical discussion, because it really shows the iterations that we've taken on designing the DLC protocol between kind of, if I remember correctly, this is almost word for word what Taj has in his white paper, and we've diverged a bit from the original white paper with, as we find more innovations in the space, but we can talk about that, I guess, in the technical section.
Okay, let's get on to that. Like, there's tons of examples, but I think that gives a flavor of some of the examples that you can do with DLCs. But let's get on to the technical stuff. Let's go on to the evolution since Taj's initial. Just before we do that, this did look cool. I just saw this earlier today. Like Lloyd Fournier did a paper on how to make a prediction market on Twitter with Bitcoin. So similar to what you and Nadav did, I think, or no, you and Nicholas did on Twitter. And he's also made a betting wallet on betting the Bitcoin price for plebs, degenerates, and revolutionaries. I just found that earlier.
Yeah, cool. I think Ben gave this a try this morning. Ben, do you want to add any color on that?
Yeah, he like put it in our DLC chat the other day and they're asking for people to test it out. So I tested it out last night. It's just like I just like did a simple bet against Lloyd on a coin flip, and I've yet, it happens I think in 2 days, so we'll see if I win. But it's pretty cool. It's only just a command line tool at the moment, so it's not too easy to use yet, but I think it's pretty cool, and I think it has a lot of potential.
Cool. Okay. So technical side.
And just out of curiosity, is Lloyd's tool for binary outcome stuff, or does it work for more general stuff?
I don't know.
Oh, okay. Me neither.
It seems very early. I think he just posted it today or yesterday. So
yeah, I remember he.
It just looked cool. So I added it through. Okay, so let's start with, let's go through the evolution of the DLC, because that hasn't really been covered, I think, on other forums or like other podcasts, videos, etc. So the very first resource is Taj's original DLC white paper. There's experts on the call. Whoever wants to take this, what was the initial concept of the discrete log contract when Taj initially released this paper?
I can take it. So I highly recommend people read the white paper if you're interested. It's only 5 pages. It's written very clearly. There's a little bit of math in there that you see, but that's about it right there on that second page. If you're comfortable with the math, it's also a decent place to learn about Schnorr signatures. This is where I learned about Schnorr signatures, was that they're just kind of defined here. The idea, well, there's kinds of 2 ideas going on. There's the higher level one and the kind of technical trick that enables it. So up on page 1, I think he states it pretty well in the abstract. Essentially the goal is to have kind of, he mentions financial use, but just more generally speaking, a private contract scheme that is scalable. So it addresses scalability and privacy concerns. And you want to kind of also minimize the amount of trust. It has a very specific Oracle model in mind where you have oblivious oracles that are being used to execute contracts on Bitcoin. And then as the name puns out, we use a discrete log and it's private, hence the misspelling with 2 E's and then a T. But essentially the trick that is used, that was kind of, I don't know if it's Tadge's innovation or if it is more so just like putting things together here. But the idea is that you can, with Schnorr signatures and other kinds of schemes, but we talk about Schnorr here, you can anticipate a signature of a specific message by some entity or such as an oracle. So you can have an oracle whose public keys are known, they publish some commitments to an event, and you can essentially create encryption keys that anticipate a specific event, and you can create one for each possible event. And this is kind of what is used in order to construct contracts. In the initial white paper, it really doesn't go much further than that, other than to say, or so essentially, you know, the idea is you have just some list of outcomes and you have a payout for each one, and that's about where it ends. There is mention at the end about further optimizations, about how you could do some other tricks, but they're not very fleshed out, and they're not exactly what we ended up using in order to flesh them out, but they're kind of the right general idea for how you would begin if you were to try and kind of generalize this to more interesting kinds of contracts. But yeah, it's a short and sweet 5 pages, just kind of explains the motivation, the model for the oracles, which is that they don't know anything and they just broadcast, and that they can't even see themselves after things have gone on chain. And then there's a section lower down about how you can anticipate a signature for each possible outcome. And then there's actually a rather vague section in which it says that you can then use this anticipation point in order to construct a contract in Bitcoin. This vagueness is kind of where the older versions of DLCs diverge from the newer ones. So the original ones kind of took a more literal approach. You take this anticipation point for a given event and you just use it as like a tweak on an on-chain key, and there's always messiness involved with that, and proving that it's secure is rather tricky. And newer iterations use these things that I'm sure we'll talk about later called adapter signatures, which are a much fancier, much more elegant kind of solution to how we take this property of Schnorr signatures, that you can anticipate signatures and use them to actually build out our contracts.
So just to be clear, it doesn't use adapter signatures. And this is around the time, because Tadge is a co-author of the Lightning white paper as well.
That's right.
So like this is only shortly after Lightning. So it's not using adapter signatures, it's not using Lightning. And and Schnorr obviously was years away from being activated. So presumably it's not using Schnorr either.
I guess it is using Schnorr. No, yeah, so it is using Schnorr. It's using Schnorr off-chain. So the Oracle signatures are Schnorr signatures, but you can use the Oracle Schnorr signatures to then create ECDSA things. So these anticipation points are derived from off-chain Schnorr stuff, but you can still then use that for on-chain Schnorr or on-chain ECDSA, or, you know, in theory, other signature schemes. So the original DLCs that were executed, both like with this paper's publication on testnet, and then later with Blockstream and Crypto Garage, and then later with us, were all actually using ECDSA on chain. Everything works, you know, today. But we are actually using a Schnorr variant off chain.
Okay, that hasn't quite clicked to me how you can have a Schnorr signature like
the key piece of the model
is
that oracles are not related to the Bitcoin blockchain in this model. An oracle is just an entity that signs things. It announces, in the future, I'm going to sign X. I'm going to sign the Bitcoin price on this weekend, on Saturday. And then on Saturday, it broadcasts the signature of what the Bitcoin price is. And those are the only two functions it has. It doesn't have anything to do with the blockchain. It doesn't look at a blockchain. It doesn't need a blockchain. And then what it is doing is it's using Schnorr signatures. So it's posting announcements with pub keys, and then the signature of the price is actually a Schnorr signature, right? This isn't a thing that's going on the blockchain. You can use whatever signature scheme that admits an anticipation thingy that you want. Schnorr just happens to be, you know, a really convenient, compact, efficient, nice one that has libraries in Bitcoin now. So essentially the oracle is just using Schnorr. And then the fancy trick that is in this paper explains how from the Schnorr stuff, we can get just this public key that we can use in then anything. So like in ECDSA, we can use this public key to tweak our signatures that are ECDSA signatures in order to enforce our contracts. So Taj was actually using Schnorr signatures in the paper, and we do use Schnorr signatures for DLCs kind of generally speaking.
This is a different trick of an oracle signature feeding into who gets paid, like different to an adapter signature.
So an adapter signature actually is a version. So there's kind of a couple different ways you can do this. One way that is kind of the original way is you can use your public key literally to just like add it to other public keys. But that gets kind of nasty. With adapter signatures, you use it as an encryption key. But either way, you're using kind of this Schnorr stuff, and you're using it to tweak or do some variant scheme on your normal on-chain signatures. And so the original way of doing that was kind of nasty, and that's like, for example, what Crypto Garage and Blockstream did and what we did initially. And then adapter signatures only came later on as kind of like an improved way to use these pub keys that correspond to real life events.
I think I'm going to have to read the paper again. I thought it wasn't using adapter signatures, but it sounds like it's using like a flavor of adapter signatures that isn't quite the adapter signatures we're using now.
It has a similar interface to adapter signatures, but it's actually just vague. It doesn't say. So it's very easy these days to read it and be like, oh yeah, he's talking about adapter signatures right now. When really he was saying something much more vague. You need something that acts like this. And then doesn't state which one it is, or how you have something that acts like that. And these days we use adapter signatures because they act like that. But the initial iterations did not use adapter signatures. They used other things that were similar, probably less secure, and definitely worse in other ways.
Yeah, and then, okay. And you also have this blog post where you explained how they work before the latest adapter signatures that are used currently now with DLCs.
Go ahead, Nadav. I believe you know, one of the kind of key things that came along for us in I think April of 2020 was Lloyd figuring out how to do ECDSA adapter signatures, which is a primitive available on the Bitcoin blockchain, so that we can you know, enforce these things actually on chain for settlement of transactions. I forget like exactly, was that about the right time?
Was Lloyd figured out that this was likely possible in December of 2019 and posted under a pseudonym to the mailing list. And then he fleshed it out a bit more and published an actual like GitHub, you know, paper draft of how this works and what the security is like. And that was, I want to say, like March or February of 2020. And then there was an online hackathon, Lightning Hack Day, that me and Jonas, Nick, and a bunch of other folks from Suredbits and some others, Waxwing, Adam Gibson, and Lloyd was also involved. We got together and we implemented ECDSA adapter signatures and a little thing built on top of them. And so that was the first implementation of ECDSA adapter signatures happened, in April of 2020. And then it was cleaned up, tests were added, it was made more production ready, and it was merged into libsec P256K1 ZKP a couple months ago. I want to say like 4 months ago. And that was Jesse Posner who picked up Nickler's work and tidied it up and took it over the finish line. So when we were originally working on DLCs, we had about a year before ECDSA adapter signatures existed and could be used. And so we were doing other nastier tricks that are explained in that blog post. They're not terribly nasty or anything, but from a code perspective, it was like 4 times as much code to get it to work. If I recall, when we switched to ECDSA adapter signatures, it cut the code base into a quarter of the size.
Oh, wow. Okay. Okay, interesting. So yeah, this is just you saying, we've got a better design than what Taj initially put in the white paper. We want to use this flavor of adapter signatures. Schnorr, we don't have Schnorr yet. Like, can we do this with ECDSA? It turns out we can in like a kind of convoluted way. But once we have Schnorr, it'll be a bit easier.
That's right. And the way we're doing it now that we're using ECDSA adapter signatures is actually going to make it much easier to transfer to using Schnorr, because we're already using all of the same interfaces as Schnorr adapter signatures and the like. So it will be much closer to just swapping out ECDSA for Schnorr than it would have been if we had to do all of these changes all at once. So we kind of, it also helps from a development perspective where we've moved to the thing that's more Schnorr-like, even though it's not Schnorr yet. And you know, it's better in every other way too, because Schnorr is great.
Okay, cool. Let's post some ideas that we have covered. So let's go on to the security and trust model and then oracles. And then I'm just trying to think what should do next. Actually, let's just continue with the evolution of DLCs for a moment. So we have, so in terms of, so there's a bunch of different evolutions here. There's the adapter signatures, which you've just covered and stuff. Then there's the like, do we do this on chain? Do we do this in a payment channel? Perhaps in the future, do we do this on a routed payment, like across a Lightning network type thing? The examples that we showed earlier were within a payment channel, were they? With no routing. Is that right?
I think the examples that we were talking about earlier were strict on-chain DLCs. As of now, we have not begun development on layer 2 DLCs yet. We're starting to get some inbound interest from Lightning implementations looking to support at least rudimentary DLCs between a counterparty and another person. But yeah, where we're at in development today is we have an on-chain wallet that works well. You can go download it at suredbits.com/BitcoinS and play around with this stuff. We've got a lot of like improvements on the engineering front on in the pipeline, but we've also published videos out there that you can go find that Ben made to show how to do a DLC between two counterparties. But to be explicit, yeah, like it is just on chain currently, and we're trying to get our code solidified in that regard, and the specs solidified in that regard before going up to layer 2.
Yeah, there's been a lot of work on off-chain DLCs, but it's all off-chain DLCs are paper DLCs. They haven't actually existed on computers yet. But we have a pretty good ideas about what that is going to take and what it's going to look like when it's done. There are just a couple barriers before that work can actually begin. My understanding is that most of the work that needs to happen to kind of unblock off-chain DLC work is on Lightning implementation side of things, where there's a lot of kind of more generalization that needs to happen, and hopefully the move to Taproot will be a good motivator to start this work, is kind of our hope.
But I suspect like the first thing that you would do to take advantage of Schnorr and Taproot would be to just use Schnorr in an on-chain setting, right? Just to do Schnorr adapter signatures. If DLCs are currently all on-chain, you'll be using Schnorr on-chain to begin with.
Sure, certainly, yeah. So Schnorr Taproot will certainly be something that benefits DLCs even on-chain. More so, I guess what I was referencing was that there are going to be changes coming to the implementation structure of Lightning nodes in the near future because they're going to be moving to Taproot, and they're still going to have to support old channels for some period of time. And so that's going to force them to have to be able to do more than one thing. And right now, Lightning implementations are quite hard-coded to do just the one thing they do. And there's a lot of kind of generalization that needs to happen in order to allow other kinds of things to live in Lightning channels other than just payments. And so in order to have DLCs, we need a more general state machine, or the kind of internals need to be able to handle more general kinds of things than just payments. And my hope is that the first step in this direction will be when Lightning implementations have to support both pre and post Taproot. They're going to be a little more general. Their internals are going to have to be more flexible. And then once they're more flexible, it should be much easier for us to start kind of doing other things inside of Lightning channels as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I kind of see two possible alternative directions. One, which is like, yes, you try and get integrated into Lightning implementations so that you can work within existing. And I think this was the approach Tad was doing initially with like his Lightning implementation Lips, which was just to do payment channels and just to set up like a network of payment channels, not do the routing, and almost like set up a new network that's almost kind of separate to Lightning, and just to like get off the ground, given that you're not actually taking advantage of the routing to begin with.
Yeah, I think the main consideration is, well, at least from us engineers' perspective, it's like the thing we hate most is redoing work. So if we, gut a Lightning implementation and put DLCs in there, and then later in the future, we're also going to be putting DLCs into normal, more generalized channels, we want to make sure that, like, I'm not saying we wouldn't necessarily do the first thing, but we'd want to make sure we were doing the first thing in a way that's compatible in the future with kind of these more generalized channels. And I think it feels like we're just like a year, maybe a bit less, maybe 2 years or something like this away from having an actual framework for what it's going to look like to have more generalized channels. And so we're kind of hesitant to start work that might have to just be thrown away in the future, when we know that soon enough we're going to know what direction is the right one to take.
Yeah, I get that. And I agree that, like, I mean, there's going to be various upgrades to Lightning, right? There's going to be, so like, it's which upgrade to Lightning is best for like the DLCers to try and like jump in.
I would
and
argue
take advantage.
PTLCs.
Right, yeah. It's probably going to be PTLCs rather than like the music upgrades, which will probably happen earlier before the PTLC upgrade.
But like kind of, piggybacking off what Nadav is saying, like the oldest parts of these Lightning implementations are their HTLC state machines, and there is a very strong resistance to changing these things because A, it's dangerous. I mean, you might introduce bugs. B, sometimes, the people have left these companies that wrote this initial code, and now, there's newcomers that come and have to maintain this and are also scared of introducing these bugs because they aren't the original people that wrote this stuff. So it's going to be a long conversation, I think, in the Lightning community to get them comfortable with, changing these core state machines, specifically their HTLC state machines, and incorporating these more general channels. And I mean, I think also there isn't, when talking about more general channels, I don't know if there's a clear winner in that regard, unless you're just talking about PTLCs as your more general channel, right, Nadav?
Yeah. So I mean, the ideal would be more general channels, which would obviously let you do PTLCs on top of other things. But I imagine PTLCs are like a good first generalizing step. So they'll probably happen prior to that. It'll happen in that direction. And also I want to add a C, like another reason why people don't want to change the Lightning state machine is because for the things it does right now, it is provably optimal. And so everyone's always like, changing things comes at a slight, disadvantage to the current use case. But I don't think anyone's
You mean
too
like the
serious about
scripts? The
that.
scripts are optimal? What do you mean by?
No, I mean
provably
like the
optimal?
actual internals for how they
Okay.
handle, like from a computer science perspective, the algorithm that they use is provably optimal and as fast as possible. For if the only thing you're doing is HTLCs. The HTLC state machine that is implemented in the current Lightning implementations is optimal. And what we call for is less optimal for HTLCs, but can do much more. So there's that trade-off. I don't think that there's significant pushback, but it's kind of more an inertia that has to be overcome where like, I guess people need to be convinced that like it's very much worth it to be working on changing these things when what we have is so nice for this one thing that it does. Yeah, but I think, yeah, so go ahead.
To play devil's advocate, like if it's going to take a while for Lightning to get Musig and PTLCs, is that not an argument for like trying to set up like bootstrap our own a DLC network of payment channels? Because then you could start with everything that you want, right? You're not sitting there waiting for Lightning to implement what you want to implement.
Yeah,
and
so
that always takes longer than you'd hope.
I still think it's totally possible to take that approach, but I would again just say we would probably wait to start that work until we actually see how we're supposed to do it. Because there are a couple different ways that this can be done, like how you would gut it and replace it. And we want to make sure that we do it in a way that can be reused in the future. And that is something that I think will be much clearer in, less than 2 or 3 years.
And like, I guess just, so I was talking with some Lightning folks this weekend and talking about, what's on the roadmap for various Lightning companies. And my argument to them is like, we need more adoption on the Lightning network. I think everybody agrees with this, and number is going up currently, so that's great. But, one of the reasons that number go up could be attributed to LND adding new features like key send. I have issues with key send, but I don't think it can be argued that there's a lot more applications that are enabled by this. And I think we need to pitch them the same way with PTLCs. It's like, well, we've pretty much written a whole archive at this point about things you can do with PTLCs, and it's going to enhance the expressiveness of the Lightning network, which is going to make number go up even more on the Lightning network. So, we need to pitch them on, this is a new feature set with your last features that you didn't really go through the consensus process for Lightning to integrate. You've got some interesting apps out there for that. And the same thing can happen in PTLC world. Unfortunately, going back to what we already hashed over was it is much more invasive to do the PTLC stuff around the core HTLC state machine logic that's already existing.
There's actually a pretty fun, I posted an update to the Lightning Dev mailing list. Might have been a bit under a year ago, or maybe a bit more than a year ago. But regardless, it kind of was after this hack day had happened and we had ECDSA adapter signatures. And I kind of posted an update on PTLCs, what work had been done, on-chain proofs of concepts that we'd executed, and what the set of things that needed to be changed in the Lightning network were. And I believe Roast Beef responded to this mailing list post being like, I wouldn't call this minimal change. This is the largest change that would have ever happened to the Lightning network. You're changing the state machine. And I was like, okay, I guess you're right. But yeah, anyway, for context, Roast Beef once said this would be the biggest change to Lightning that has ever happened. Not DLCs, just to be clear, like something much smaller than DLCs. That's a required first step, which is just changing the state machine at all, which has not happened yet.
I get the sense roast beef is more on the disruptive side rather than the conservative side.
Oh,
so,
yeah. I mean, I've talked to him quite a bit since about
yeah.
Generalizing channels, and it's certainly something he wants to do, and it's something he's working on. It'll certainly happen. I'm not worried that like there's going to be. I think the consensus is that it's like the right approach. It's just a lot of work, and the work is happening slowly.
Fair enough. So one idea that I did.
And I also wanted to.
Go for it,
sorry. I just wanted to add to what Chris was saying. And first of all, hello everybody. I just wanted to add to what Chris was saying that about number go up in Lightning. I think it will happen. I think especially in Central America, like once the adoption here, because we are only like 3.5 weeks away from the government wallet being released here. And it's not only just like El Salvador, it's like all the neighboring countries like gearing up to like pretty much adopt Lightning as well. You know, because if you think about it, like and it's not like really public information, but the banks, most of the banks here actually are owned by foreign banks, let's say, right? Like the three major banks here are owned by Colombian banks, right? Which means that as they help the banks here integrate with Lightning, they are also themselves getting ready to integrate with Lightning as well. So we have Colombia, which is like right next door. We have Guatemala, which is like right next door. And we have exchanges, like all the exchanges here are pretty much integrating with Lightning as well. So I think it's just a matter of time until we see actually an explosion of usage here. And remember that, like, you know, El Salvador alone is like 6.5 million people. So if they onboard like an entire nation on it, I think it's going to be like a great, really like increase in the usage, but also like a good way to like stress test the Lightning network. So I think it's just a matter of time. So I think it's just
I don't know how much of it is like literally on Lightning. Like, is there a big uptick in terms of Lightning channels because of this adoption, or are they just all doing it custodial service?
It's kind of like custodial per se in the beginning, but well, that's a word because nobody really knows yet from the government. Actually, nobody actually even knows yet if the wallet is going to be on chain or like a Lightning wallet, the first iteration of the wallet itself, the one coming up on September 7th, the Chivo wallet, right? But we are hearing that actually it will have Lightning integration, from the get-go. So whether or not it's a custodial or non-custodial wallet, I think it doesn't really matter, because ultimately, if the wallet can allow for people to withdraw on-chain or through Lightning, then it's like it's open game, because then anybody can use any wallet out here. And then that's what the government, I think, is trying to like really like push forward for anybody to use any wallet like that's available, like be it like in here. It's really, you know, it's well balanced. It's between basically Bitcoin Beach wallet, the wallet of Satoshi. So people using Moon now, and then and Strike, of course, right? So I think like over time, as people get more comfortable and they understand how to use wallets, then they will use whichever wallet actually works for them. And ultimately, like it's going to be really like an increased number of usage. Let me just put it that way. So I don't want to be like sound like a prophet or anything like that, say something that might not happen. But from what I can see here, I think like it's going to be like an explosion of usage.
This might seem like a diversion to DLCs, but like,
yeah,
no, it's not actually a diversion, as I'm just about to explain. So like AJ Towns' idea that he put to the post on this, he also spoke at Sydney Socratic on this, is like, so AJ is like trying to get more adoption on Lightning, more people using Lightning. And AJ's argument was in the early days of Bitcoin, Satoshi Dice was the biggest use case of Bitcoin, and there were tons and tons of transactions. Now we look back and go, oh, how terrible it was. Like my node has to verify all these terrible transactions. But you could argue like back then, any adoption, like Bitcoin was nothing, right? No one was using it. So I mean, it had a purpose that people were actually using Bitcoin for something. And so AJ's argument was, I don't want to put words into his mouth because you can read his name on this post, was that you could do similar like Satoshi Dice, gambling on dice, gambling on coin tosses on Lightning to get the adoption up on Lightning. If your objective is to get adoption up on Lightning, more people using Lightning. But it sounds like from your perspective, Fode, that we don't need to be as concerned with adoption on Lightning, that people are going to be using Lightning for payments.
No, not at all.
And we don't need the DLCs to get that adoption up.
I mean, it depends. It depends. Like, I think we need any kind of technology out there, because usually the markets will actually determine what they want, right? You know, the market will actually say really what's needed. To me, it's like we just have to try it all. Just like really throw the kitchen sink at it and then see what happens. And then whatever sticks, and then ultimately whatever doesn't really is not being used will be discarded, like natural selection. So I'm not saying like DLCs are not, would not be used or would not be needed per se. I mean, that's what I mean. I'm curious about DLCs, like especially since I met Chris in Miami. So now I'm just like, I really need to see how these things happen actually, how it works.
Yeah, just to be clear, like I think DLCs have got a use case, they've got a definite use case. It's just whether they are like the first killer use case for Lightning, or whether like it's a separate network and Lightning's going to be fine on its own, and like DLCs kind of take advantage of Lightning, or perhaps set their own network up, and just whatever works with DLCs.
I think since the earliest days of us working on DLCs, we've always had the kind of implicit assumption that eventually Bitcoin blockchain space is going to fill. It's going to be uneconomical for lower value DLCs to happen on Bitcoin. So let's use our layer 2 solution for what it is, and just lift DLCs up into channels. Like if you're doing smaller DLCs, like less than a Bitcoin, I mean, I think doing them on Lightning makes a lot of sense. If you're doing like hundreds of Bitcoin or thousands of Bitcoin of in your DLC, the same security incentives that apply with Lightning, also apply with DLCs. They're just another output in your Lightning channel. So you need to be mindful of very large DLCs on Lightning in the same way that you need to be mindful of very large HTLCs on Lightning as well. But I going back a step or two, I always try and not be judgmental of the economic activity that's happening on the chain, assuming that it's not parasitic to the underlying blockchain. And I don't think we need to, as Bitcoin developers or even just the Bitcoin community, need to be getting in the business of judging whether this is worthy to be on the Bitcoin blockchain or if it's not to be worthy. Like the fee market's there to determine that, and that's the whole purpose of fees on chain is to price out things where it doesn't have as much economic value, and it needs to go to a layer 2 solution, and that's fine in my opinion.
And the downsides are totally different now. Like if we're doing parallels with Satoshi Dice and like DLCs and Lightning, like every single transaction was on chain. Like we're talking about a potential future where there's tons of DLCs going over Lightning with barely any touching the chain, right? So it is on the downsides, it's very different. But then perhaps there is like the upsides in terms of like this could be a use case to get more people using Lightning. I don't know.
Well, I think
I also think DLCs are like a nice like test run for doing more generalized off-chain stuff. Like layer 2 currently is kind of in its first iteration where it's just payments that are happening. And I think in the future, like as Chris mentioned, almost everything is going to happen off-chain. It's going to have to. Essentially, I can't imagine anything happening on-chain except for, or certainly nothing cooperative should ever happen on-chain. That's just kind of like a principle. There's no reason to be using a blockchain directly for anything other than assurance that if things stop being cooperative, then you have a backup. But as a first resort, you should never actually be using a blockchain if any activity that you're doing is cooperative. And so in the future, we're actually going to need layer 2 to handle most everything. And I think, we have payments down as kind of the first step. And I think DLCs are like an ideal second step. They're pretty minimal in their kind of package for what you need to actually do in a technical sense. They have immediate use cases, so they're marketable to people so that you can actually have these things get implemented and integrated. And they're not as trivial as just a payment. It's not that a payment is trivial. Layer 2 took quite a while to come around. But as far as like contingent payments go, it's about as simple as it gets. So I think it's kind of, in some sense, it can be viewed as like the natural next step after payment channels is introducing things like DLCs into off-chain ecosystems.
Cool, makes sense. Okay, so I do want to have a final section on oracles before we wrap up. But just to finish like the Lightning section, like this is looking forward to when there's DLCs on Lightning. You've said before, Nadav, so when we get to routed DLCs, this is looking very, very far ahead, right? But not only a DLC within a payment channel, but routed across multiple payment channels. You've said like, the problem there is that if you do a bet that settles in 6 to 12 months, and that capital, if with a conventional like DLC over a routed Lightning channels, the capital will be locked up on every hop, right? And that's not ideal. We're kind of in the same space as like HODL invoices with like capital being locked up, and we don't want.
I'd argue it's
Lightning,
actually exactly the same space.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So the Lightning people, well, a lot of there's good reasons not to like that if capital's locked up for no reason, right? Or
Yeah.
when they want to be doing payments settling very quickly all the time. You've said like barrier escrows could potentially be a solution to this. Do you want to talk about
So I don't think
yeah,
this is so it's kind of two separate things. So there's
okay.
With HODL invoices, there is the current problem that the entire kind of assumptions, the set of assumptions, the model under which we operate Lightning is a model in which the use case is fast payments that are executed immediately and then resolved. HODL HTLCs or HODL invoices are essentially payments that are kind of long-standing, so they don't complete immediately. They kind of get set up, and then they stay in that state of just being set up, locking up the capital along the route until some future date when the payment actually gets settled. So it's kind of a delayed settlement Lightning payment in which all of this capital gets locked up. So in the current model, this is essentially indistinguishable from spam. Like if I was going to spam attack the Lightning network, I would just set up a bunch of very long route payments to myself and never complete them. And for each Satoshi I have to lock up, I can lock up like 20x that. So I can lock up 20 Satoshis of other people's capital because of the routing. And so you have this huge kind of leveraged power where you can spam the Lightning network. So I would say today, the Lightning network is not generally spam resistant. There's certainly, there's I think 4 different competing proposals that are in the works right now for how to solve this problem. And so all of these problems essentially boil down to you have to pay people for their capital lockup, not just on a one-time basis as it is right now, but also in some sense you have to compensate them either probabilistically or otherwise for you have to take into account the amount of time that capital is locked up, because you're paying for the use of other people's capital in routing, and you're using the capital much more if it's a HODL invoice than if it's a normal one. So essentially, there are a bunch of different proposals out there for how to kind of price this in, where these people who are holding and locking up their collateral are getting paid compensation that's kind of proportional to that cost for them. Yeah, and essentially, once this problem is solved, it's fundamentally a problem of spam, secondarily a problem for HODL invoice HTLCs, and I would say only tertiary, it happens to also be true for things like routed DLCs and other contracts. If you solve the problem for spam, then the problem also becomes solved for DLCs. It'll just be priced in. DLCs will be a little bit more expensive to do if you're routing them than they would be to route them today, but it wouldn't be bad for the network. So it's kind of, there's some stuff that isn't priced in under the current Lightning Network model. In the future, it will be. I think that essentially this problem reduces to the problem of spam, which is a problem a lot of people are working on in a lot of different places.
Just to like comment there, it's like maybe DLCs would even be good for Lightning in this regard if the spam problem is solved, because then, you know, people that are putting their capital on Lightning, maybe they want to route DLCs because they can have longer standing DLCs on their Lightning channels rather than these HTLCs that, you know, appear quickly and then should be cleared quickly too. So maybe it's a longer term, you know, source of income for Lightning node routers, you know, when they're routing these larger DLCs that are, you know, hanging off the channel for a while.
Yeah. The problem that barrier escrows solve is a related but different one.
Yeah, I
where-
misunderstood this. I
No,
misunderstood
that's all
this.
right.
This
No
this
worries.
solves the explain because
Yeah,
there's
so
the capital
essentially-
lockup problem, and there's also the problem of like getting a free option.
Yes,
in
there's a
terms of
free
the
option
price.
problem.
So, like
Exactly.
you enter into an agreement, and then the price
That's right.
swings, and then you leave that agreement because you basically got a free option.
So
right?
essentially, if I want in a simple example, say I want to bet with Chris whether or not it's going to rain where I am tomorrow, and say, I say it won't rain, he says it will, and we want to do a routed DLC over Lightning. What needs to happen is I need to set up a payment to him contingent on it raining. So I set up a payment to him, and the points associated with that payment, the tweak, is the Oracle anticipation for the event it's raining. And say that's for 1 Bitcoin, just for simple numbers. And then he needs to set up a payment to me for 1 Bitcoin, say, contingent on it won't rain. Now, only one of those two things is going to happen. Say it does rain, then Chris can claim his payment, and I'm never going to be able to claim my payment because the Oracle is never going to publish it didn't rain. And so I can just fail that payment and return the collateral. So the problem here, though, is there are these two payments that need to be set up from one to the other. And the question is, like, who moves first, right? If I set up my payment to Chris, he can just like never set up a payment to me. And now that's a free option because he essentially, if it does rain, gets paid. And if it doesn't rain, he doesn't lose anything. So he hasn't set this up in return. So this notion of a barrier escrow, which kind of came out of a discussion between me and ZM and SCPXJ, was a solution to a similar problem that happens to also solve this problem, where we can essentially atomically set up two payments. So how it works is we have kind of the payment I'm going to set up to Chris and the payment Chris is going to set up to me. And we kind of add one extra lock to both of them. That's the same lock with some other point, say E, that belongs to this barrier escrow. And then what me and Chris do is we do an AMP. So that's an atomic multipath payment to this third party. They don't know who we are. They don't know what they're being used for. All they do is they accept payments. So once both me and Chris's payments have been set up to them, then it releases. So essentially how this looks is rather than I set up a payment to Chris and he sets one up to me, what we do is we both set up payments to each other that go through each other and to some shared point elsewhere on the network. And that shared elsewhere point happens atomically just using the existing thing, which is AMPs. So using just AMPs, we can essentially bootstrap AMPs into helping with atomic multi-payment setup. And so you can set up as many different consecutive payments as you want for all the different possible outcomes, and you can get fancy with it. And that essentially lets you do DLCs routed over Lightning if you have PTLCs.
So you effectively, like, with that problem where, like, I make an offer to you, Nadav, and then you have like a time to either decide whether to accept it, or like if something swings in your favor, like say you bet on the rain, and while you're deciding whether you want to enter into a bet on whether it rains or not, you're looking out the window to see if it rains, right? So like you've got this information where you can decide whether to agree or disagree. And so the solution is that you introduce a third party, so there is no advantage or no delay where one of the parties can
in general, this is what it's like. In this particular example, it's actually even a bit worse since there's just two outcomes. Like Chris can always accept my payment and never send one back. In a normal DLC, there's more than two outcomes and there are multiple payments being set up between two parties. So you could kind of interweave them and like stop at some other point, which would be kind of more analogous to what you're saying. But in some sense, yes, that's exactly the problem, is that someone can like verbally agree to something or, online agree to something. And then during the process of actually committing to it, they can take advantage of the other person if you're not careful. And this is barrier escrows solve this problem in a trust minimized way. You don't have to trust your counterparty in any way anymore. You have a much smaller amount of trust that's much more economically motivated that you put into some third party that's publicly auditable. kind of very similar, especially if you're already doing DLCs. Arguably, there's much less trust that is required in a barrier escrow than in an Oracle. So it seems like an acceptable thing to do, at least for the DLC use case.
And the solution to the long-term capital lockup problem is either you do it in a payment channel where both parties in the payment channel are happy to lock it up between each other, as you would on chain, right? If you're locking it up on chain, like you're not getting anything for that capital while it's locked up, or you're paying like higher routing fees effectively, right?
Exactly,
like
yeah. And you would pay, presumably, the longer it'll take to execute the contracts, the more proportionally that you'd have to pay in routing fees.
Right.
And then it just becomes a calculation of like, is it worth it to do it off-chain or on-chain? And if on-chain fees are super high, it's still going to be worth it to pay those higher routing fees.
Okay, let's go into oracles first. I'll just quickly highlight a couple of links I saw. So I saw Tipo had done a PR for Rust Lightning on DLCs. So it looks as if there's some activity on Rust Lightning from Tipo. You guys are Scala guys, right? So are you trying to get DLC stuff into Eclair?
We would love to. The Eclair guys aren't the most friendly guys, I guess, with merging code that's not theirs. Funnily enough, Roman actually implemented the Postgres support that they have in Eclair, though. So they do have a different database backend now, partially thanks to, I think mostly thanks to Roman, actually. But Roman's actually also done work on demoing ECDSA adapter signatures on Lightning as well, to see how invasive these changes to this HTLC state machine are. And so I guess if people want to look at what that world might look like, I can dump a link to the implementation in the chat here.
So
just to be clear,
it's really complicated. So basically the HTLC just is like it's the core thing that Eclair made about. And recently I just tried to rebase my branch with PTLCs with their current branch. It's literally a nightmare. So there's so many changes in so many places. So it's literally it's just kind of impossible to track. So probably that's one of the reasons we need some kind of general concept for channels.
Yeah, it's complicated. Just to correct Chris, like the Eclair guys are very friendly. Bastian, Fabrice, Roman, they're very friendly guys, but like it's hard to get stuff in, and it should be hard to get stuff in, right? Like
yeah, and I think part of it is just are they still a smaller team than Lightning Labs? I have the impression that at least they used to be. I don't know if they still are, but they have finite resources and a lot of work, and currently generalizing channels is not the top of their priority list, and so not much progress happening there. But we do have DLCs implemented in Scala, so if they ever want it, it's pretty easy to plug in. That's the easy part. The hard part is the actual making it possible to plug in.
The other thing was I was looking through some of the work like Taj and other people to his lit implementation done. There's a bunch of PRs on DLCs. So this is kind of like if you were to go down the like different implementation approach rather than trying to like get it integrated into an existing implementation.
Yeah, and this is the pre-adapter signature implementation, by the way.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Okay, cool. So let's go on to oracles. Where should we start? So the oracles and DLCs, and this was what Taj initially described in his paper. So with a 2 of 3, all the participants need to identify who the oracle is, right? Like the oracle is going to be signing in a 2 of 3. So like the 2 participants in the contract have to find an oracle who's willing to sign in case they don't come to agreement. So Taj's concept was that instead, the Oracle is just going to sign various statements and not actually know they're participating in any of these contracts, right? And that's what you've gone with. And there's various reasons why you've gone with that approach. Do you want to quickly just go? So why is it better if the people if the Oracle doesn't know that their statements are being, or their signed statements are being used in contracts?
Yeah, so like the first one you're talking about, like the multi-sig case, is just like a 2 of 3 multi-sig, and like your third party will like know the exact UTXO is using on chain. They can see your transaction. They literally have to sign it, so they could track exactly like who, like which party won the money. They know like where the funds are going, where the funds are coming from. So it's really unprivate, and plus now you have an extra public key on chain, so it's a little less scalable. And for the actual Oracle or your third party helper, they have a lot of more regulatory risk where like, they might need the KYC your users, or, they might need to be a public entity, and, it makes it just like harder to do. And versus with the DLC model, the Oracle just signs like, it is raining outside, or it signs, the Bitcoin price, or Biden won the presidency, just something like that. Now that single signature can be used for every single user that's using them as an Oracle. So for the
And
Oracle,
not
it's a lot.
traceable to the Oracle.
Yeah. So the Oracle, just a lot easier for them. They just put it out, and for the users, it's better because the Oracle doesn't know they're being used, and they're hiding from the Oracle, as well as it's only between them and their counterparty.
In some sense, it's like the difference between the don't be evil and can't be evil models. So the 2 of 3 is a don't be evil kind of trust model, and I guess it's not can't be evil, but the DLC Oracle model is like it's much harder to be evil because you know so much less, and because you're essentially telling everyone the same thing.
So let me take the evil case and take the devil's advocate case. Like, the disadvantages are that it's hard to incentivize the Oracle to sign a lot of statements, because obviously you need an exact statement to be signed, right? Like if it's raining, it needs to be like exactly yes or no. It can't be yes, it was raining that was signed. So you need the exact statement to be signed perfectly.
Yeah.
And if there's any difference, then that signature won't be a valid signature to feed into the DLC.
And so this is actually one of the biggest motivations for writing a specification, like we've been doing, rather than just, kind of using this technology. It's very actually like the first month, we built out fully functioning DLCs, and then like since then has been like, okay, but everyone's has to be doing the same thing and working together, so that this is nice and standardized. So I think, in the future, this won't be a problem, because we'll have standards that everyone can follow for announcing what messages they might sign, and then signing exactly those messages. And signing a slightly different message is considered fraud in this world where we have these standards, in the same way that lying is considered fraud. I do think it's true that it is harder to pay an oblivious entity, but this is actually a problem Lightning solves. So there's actually a few different ways that one could end up incentivizing oracles. And at the end of the day, that's for the, so long as one way works, the market will make sure that it does. And I think it does kind of become more feasible once you also realize that there's a lot less overhead required to be a DLC Oracle than to be a 2 of 3 signer, where you have to be dealing with individuals directly, as opposed to just broadcasting messages. Like if you look at the DLC code that's been written, like there's a ton of client-side code and just like a couple files of DLC Oracle side code. The Oracle, essentially all of the complexity in DLCs goes to the client, goes to the users, the DLC participants, and the Oracle kind of does the bare minimum. And so they're slightly harder to incentivize. I think that's just universally true because of the constraints. But I think it's still possible, and it's cheaper to operate a DLC Oracle. So I think it works out.
Yeah,
I think that's go for it.
to highlight on like the complexity of like creating the Oracle, like me and the DAO probably spent a couple months writing the actual DLC wallet code, and I wrote the
At least a
Oracle.
year. Come on.
Well, like the initial spec of it.
Sure, the initial
spec of
stuff.
it.
Yeah.
And for the initial Oracle, I did it in a weekend for
Yeah, it was a
fun.
weekend project just for fun.
So these downsides, I think they're all manageable, but like the other downside I can think of is that like so I've got up here like Oracle announcements. So rather than the flow being like, Chris, I want to enter into a bet on whether it's going to rain like where I currently am, right? And us going through the Oracle announcements and going, whoa, but there's no Oracle that's willing to like be part of this contract because the Oracle doesn't know where I live or whether it's going to rain where I live. That's the other downside, right? Like you have to be using, the flow is you go to the Oracle announcements and you see what contract you want to enter into, rather than me and Chris saying, oh, let's do a contract on some weird bet that there isn't an Oracle announcement on.
So there's certainly a bootstrapping problem when it comes to oracles with DLCs, and that's one thing we're definitely working a lot on. And this site is very much oriented towards, it's not just us posting these things. Anyone can come post Oracle stuff on this site. It's just kind of you can think of it as like a forum. Everyone's posting stuff on here that they can attest to. So I think this is maybe a slightly more transient problem. In the future, you could imagine weather.com, just like all their data is signed on top of just published. It's not that much more work for them necessarily. If they're doing any kind of Oracle stuff, making it so that all of their stuff is signed isn't a big next step. And so, I hope in the future that finding an Oracle isn't the hardest problem, and the hardest problem will be like finding a counterparty, which has its own kind of struggles, though this is also true for the 2 of 3 case. The other thing worth noting is that you can still ask someone to be your Oracle even if they know you. It's just essentially the trust model reduces down to the 2 of 3 in that case. So I would say that DLCs do just as well as 2 of 3 in that case, and they do better in cases where oracles already exist for other things, because in the 2 of 3 case you still have to find someone who is willing to sign off on whatever's happening, and you could do that and find them and tell them to be a DLC oracle. You're just not really using them like a DLC oracle at that point, and your trust model has reduced down to that of a 2 of 3.
I mean, you still have some benefits. It's like, say like you and Chris are entering to a bet. I don't need to know how big your bet is or like what your UTXOs are. So
it is a slight improvement. Yeah.
So it's just like getting that bootstrap flow right? Like perhaps like the Oracle announcements should all be like respectable inverted commas, or like people everyone know who are saying what the price is, right?
Yeah, and I think this is part
rather than a random person like me coming onto your Oracle site and saying, like, it's raining outside my house now, like when nobody cares.
So I think one consideration is that on this Oracle site, one goal is to actually show someone's like past as well, so you can see things they've done before and stuff like that. Maybe in the future there will be kind of a more explicit reputation built into things. But I think actually this is one of Lloyd's motivations in using Twitter, is like, you can bootstrap on Twitter reliability, whatever metrics exist there, they're faulty there as well. But if someone's got a blue check mark or something like that, maybe it's worth a little bit more. But yeah, essentially, I think Lloyd is using Twitter to get around various problems to do with kind of verification and reputation when it comes to oracles.
There's some very cool cryptographic stuff like with oracles. So like you've talked about this on other things, so we don't need to go into too much detail of Nadav, but like the signing 2 statements and like losing your private keys is a really cool trick. So like you can only sign one of the 2 statements. That was cool. So that's the punishment. There's also the possibility to have multiple oracles, so like a multi-sig.
And that works today.
That works today in your current implementation of adaptive signatures on chain.
And it's in the specification, yeah.
And that is using what for the multi-sig?
A lot of math.
Are you,
Um,
can you use music for that?
So we aren't
the-
using direct public key, like you don't want to think of it like a multi-signature. We're essentially
Okay.
combining anticipate. So what you get from an oracle is their pub key information and their potential outcomes. And from that, you can do some math using Tadge's trick to compute an elliptic curve points. You can think of it like a public key, but it's a point on an elliptic curve. And that's the anticipation for a specific event. And traditionally what you do with that is you just use it as an encryption key for your signatures. That's what adapter signatures do. What we are doing for multi-oracle is you take not just one oracle's point for one event, but you like combine a bunch of different oracle's points for a bunch of different events in fancy ways. And then you just do like elliptic curve math on them to create this aggregate point that is associated with an event that it's a bit more complicated. So rather than like Alice said it's raining, you can have a point for the event Alice says it's raining and Bob says it's raining and Chris says that it's either raining or it's partly cloudy or like something like that. You can create these kinds of ands and ors of these points and create new ones and then use those to lock up the actual transactions that pay out to those events. So it's quite a bit more complicated, and this is kind of one of the biggest things we've done that isn't outlined how to do it in the white paper or even mentioned really what approaches can be taken, and we had to develop kind of our own algorithms and approaches. But yeah, multi-oracle support and numeric contract support kind of more generally uses some clever tricks that I and a couple others have come up with to essentially enable multi-oracle numeric contracts that even allow oracles to not be exactly the same number to the last digit. They can have some variance that you get to specify as the DLC participant for what is acceptable differences between oracles.
So yeah, as you say, this is adapter signatures. This isn't like
Yeah,
multi-sig with all the signatures going on chain
Right.
or music
It
where
looks-
it's key aggregation. Like
Yeah,
this
it's
is math that
indistinguishable.
kind of works out as multi-sig.
That's right.
Right.
It's called the generalization of multi-sig in computer science is called a monotone access structure, if anyone's curious.
Okay, just want to look up. So yeah, the Oracle stuff is very cool. Oracle failure cases. Yeah, we didn't go into this, but like obviously, if you're only using one Oracle and the Oracle lies, then you've got problems. But that's where like reputation system comes in, or using multiple Oracles. And then shall we end with like this? I left this to the end. So like, is there anything? So there's tons of stuff to do with Schnorr and Taproot. Is there anything for future soft forks that would be cool for DLCs? So I saw one blog post from Jeremy Rubin on betting on Taproot activation. This wasn't actually using check template verify. I think he was just using his Sapio programming language to do a bet on whether Taproot would activate. I saw that was also, I think Ben put up a Taproot activation oracle at one point on Suredbits.
On our most recent spec call, Lloyd actually detailed a way how to do DLCs with like not using adapter sigs or anything, just using covenants. So that's another potential way to do it, but I don't know, it's just like an alternative way. It doesn't really like you don't really get new functionality. But there are some improvements with things like
Sig hash.
yeah, where you can like make them more composable and stuff, where you can like,
Yeah,
oh, my
and it'll
payment goes
be
here. That
much easier to put DLCs in L2 lightning channels than in penalty lightning channels. Like it'll be so much, it's not that it'll just be easier, it'll also, if we found a way to hack together and create a slightly more generalized lightning channel and put a DLC in it just between two parties, no routing, having that DLC in your channel would slow down your channel operation, because every time you want to do something else with that channel, like a payment, you have to re-sign all of the stuff to do with the DLC. So I guess if it's a small contract, like there's only 2 outcomes or something, it's not a big deal. But if you have like a large numeric contract that depends on like the Bitcoin price or something inside of your Lightning channel, then every single update that you make to your Lightning channel is going to take a couple seconds. It's not great, or even more sometimes. But with L2, this isn't the case. So you can use SigHash any prev out to essentially dynamically bind your DLC into your channel so that you don't have to re-sign the DLC every time. The DLC can just be a part of all future channels until, you know, it's kicked out or settled or whatever. So what one thing, essentially you can think at a very high level, SigHash any prev out lets you kind of dynamically rebind transactions. So they don't just spend this output, they can spend, you know, any of the future outputs. That's how kind of the Lightning update stuff works, is any transaction can spend any previous commitment transaction in an L2 channel. And likewise, any, you know, DLC output, you don't have to re-sign all the time because you can dynamically rebind it onto future channel states without re-entering into the DLC from scratch. So I think that is going to be a big improvement once we have DLCs in Lightning channels, to have SigHash any prev out. And I think there's other tricks, Ben, that maybe you know more about for how SigHash any prev out can be used to optimize DLCs.
I mean, I think you just like, you could do like more complex things where, say like, you know, when I get paid to this address from the DLC, instead of just being it received to me, I could have like a already signed transaction that spends it from that address to like 50 other parties. So that way my DLC only needs like 1 key to sign, but the payout goes to 50 people or something. Or I don't know, there's like other fancy things you can do, or like in Chris's blog post on the DLC put contracts, that would help as well, where you don't need to constantly renegotiate it, stuff like that.
So potentially, yes, go for it.
I was just going to say, with the Coinbase put contracts example, the tough part for creating a DLC predicated on the Coinbase transaction is the fact that miners tweak the script sig and the witness commitment, which ends up changing the funding transaction ID for your DLC every time a hash is performed. With any prev out, you abstract away what the specific funding transaction is. Rather, you say it just has to match this template, and you can bind it to any transaction that follows this template, which makes things like what I talk about in this blog post here more viable in the market.
Cool. So channel factory, so at some point in the future, have a channel factory with all of us in doing DLCs between all of us.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, so there is a lot of work to do. Okay, so we'll wrap up. Is there anything, what would you want people to do? Do you want people to like find friends to do DLCs with, to use your software? Like I saw various videos of tutorials. Do you need oracles? Do you need people doing DLCs, entering into DLCs? Like what do you need?
We definitely need people entering into DLCs. You know, we're about to land a pretty major upgrade to the user experience of the DLC process, courtesy of a lot of hard work by Ben and Roman for streamlining the negotiation process of DLCs. It's going to look much more like Lightning channel openings now, rather than the kind of very complicated copy paste message back and forth process that we had previously. So it's going to be a much more streamlined experience. We should have that out in the next week or two, I would say, or probably week. And that's when we really want people to get off to the races and you know, really start trying out these things. The demo video you have up here is for becoming an Oracle, which isn't going to change significantly in the next, you know, 3 to 6 months, maybe some asterisks there, but that's, you know, something you could do today. You don't even need to know anything about a chain state data source. You can just start, you know, posting oracles on oracle.suredbits.com and telling your friends to enter into DLCs that, you know, are predicated off you being the Oracle, if they trust you, of course.
And if anyone out there is super into Rust, I know Thibaut, who is a maintainer, or is the maintainer, the only one of Rust DLC, would love, you don't even have to contribute, he just needs a review on his thousands of lines of code, which I shouldn't have put it that way, that sounds daunting, but there's always room for contribution on Rust DLC these days if you know any Rust.
Okay, very cool.
Or
Yeah, go for
contribute
it.
to this. Like, check out the spec. We have
Yeah,
a bunch
that's
of like
always helpful.
small issues that like, just like lazy things that we haven't done yet. Like, like adding pretty pictures, like correctly linking things around, and or just, I don't know, there's like other like basic stuff, but there's also like, other high level stuff that we'd love review on too. And anything would help.
Yeah,
So
and
both,
just
both
read through it.
users,
If
yeah.
something is unreadable, post an issue asking questions. Maybe we'll get around to fixing it and making it easier to understand. We're adding lots of pictures, stuff like that. It's coming together.
And lobby Roman and the Eclair guys to support DLCs and Eclair soon.
Yeah,
Okay,
so
awesome.
Bother all of your Lightning developer friends until they generalize their Lightning channels and put PTLCs into them.
Or
Yeah.
till they hate the Suredbits team.
Also a possibility.
Yeah, okay, so hounding. We'll get on that after this call. Awesome, great work, guys. Thanks for coming on. Yeah, I'll get a transcript up, but that was really cool. I look forward to seeing the latest UX that comes out in a week or two.
Yeah, thanks for hosting us, Michael.
No worries. Thanks. See ya.
See you guys.
Guys.